Greetings, welcome to Accounting 2301. Today we're going to be talking about a few of the in-class exercises from Chapter 5, Job Order Costing. So let's take a look down here. The first problem we're going to be going over is number 3, and this is asking about a unit cost calculation. We're given some information in the problem, beginning balance of 200, direct materials of 500, direct labor of 200, and we're also told that the overhead is applied to production at a rate of 55% of the direct labor. So first off, we can go ahead and make a calculation for that overhead, which you'll see here. It's 200, since that's applied to your direct labor cost of 200, times 0.55, and that gives us 110 for the overhead. We're also told in the problem that there's 5 units that are produced within this job. So thinking back to our equations, we know that unit cost is equal to total cost divided by the number of units. And our total cost here is going to include the beginning balance of 200, direct materials of 500, direct labor of 200, and also that overhead that we calculated of 110. So adding all these values up, we see that our total cost is $1,010. So from there, we have all the values that we need to calculate our unit cost. Just divide that $1,010 by 5. You see that our unit cost here is $202 per unit. So moving on to number 4. This one's a multiple choice. So we're asked, when a job is completed but not sold, what accounts are affected? So if we think back to the way that the materials are going to flow through the business here, we start out with our raw materials. It flows through into work in process. So if we think about that, raw materials could just be the lumber sitting around the yard. Once it moves into work in process, we actually bring that in and we start building tables, building chairs, but we don't quite finish them up. And this question here is asking, all right, when they're completed, then which accounts are affected? So we're taking those half completed, partially completed items and actually moving them into the finished goods by completing them. And you can see that basically the two accounts that are affected are the work in process and the finished goods. We're going to be moving them out of work in process and into finished goods since they are complete. So the answer here is B. Continuing on, next we'll take a look at problem number 7. So with this problem, we are given a whole lot of information. We're told some estimates from the beginning of the year. So these are going to be estimates for the entire period. We're also told some information about the actual direct labor hours for January, 8,150. And we are also told the actual amounts for the end of the year. And based on this, we have A through E, different items that we can calculate out. So we'll start off here looking at A, and we are asked to provide the predetermined overhead rate. Going back to our equations, it's a simple calculation. We take the estimated costs or estimated overhead in dollars and divide that by the estimated hours. So if we look back up, we're given that information, the estimates, at the top of the problem here. We've got $270,000, and we're going to divide that by our estimated 90,000 direct labor hours. And that's going to give us $3 for the predetermined overhead rate. Next, we're asked how much overhead is applied in January. So the equation for that going to take the predetermined overhead rate, which we just calculated in A, and multiply that by the actual activity level. And up here, we were given the actual direct labor hours for January, 8,150. So bring that down into our equation here, multiply by the $3, and our total is 24,450. Next, moving on to C, we are asked how much overhead is applied for the entire year. So if we're looking at overhead application, what was actually applied, we're going to be looking to our actual amounts. So we see here that by the end of the year, we're showing 102,600 in direct labor hours. Bring that amount down, multiply again by your predetermined overhead rate of $3, and the total here is 307,800. We are next asked if the overhead is overapplied or underapplied, and by what amount. From the equations in the chapter, this is actually asking about our overhead variance, which is the actual overhead minus the applied overhead. So if we look back up to C, we know that we just calculated the applied overhead for the year. And if we look back up to what was given in the problem, the actual overhead is 308,000. So we can take a simple subtraction here, just plug in those values, and we see the difference is $200. And here we've underapplied because the applied overhead is less than the actual overhead. So if you remember, if we had overapplied, then the applied would be greater than the actual overhead. Next, we'll take a look at the adjusted cost of goods sold after adjusting for the overhead variance. So for this, we're going to look back up to the information that's given in the problem for this unadjusted cost of goods sold. And that's given in the last line here, unadjusted cost of goods sold. We know from the above calculation that we're underapplied by $200. So when there's an under application, we're going to go ahead and add that amount back into the cost of goods sold. So you can see we add in our $200 here. So our adjusted cost of goods sold is $235,870. And that will be it for the Chapter 5 in-class exercises for the video today.